Just moments ago, President Trump posted that the trade deal with China was now.
Consumer prices rose slightly last month. The U.S. Labor Department reported today that inflation rose 2.4% in May compared with a year ago. That's up slightly from a month before, but actually less than expected.
I'm afraid more and more American people, when they do shopping in stores in the United States, will be hit by this tariff item.
In June 2025, Washington declared victory. A new deal with China was in place. Rare earths secured, trade stabilized. Headlines from D.C. cheered the breakthrough, calling it a turning point. But here's the part they didn't highlight. The U.S. quietly imposed a massive 55% tariff on Chinese goods, the steepest since the trade war began. Meanwhile, China only raised tariffs to 10% on U.S. imports. That's a 5-to-1 ratio. And it's American businesses and shoppers who are footing the bill. The Guardian, June 2025. Everyday goods, from tools to tech parts, are now trapped behind that 55% wall. While some items like Chinese smartphones and chips are still exempt, most aren't. U.S. importers are scrambling, prices are creeping up, and inflation just got another tailwind, and it gets worse. While Beijing did agree to accelerate rare earth exports, materials vital for EVs and defense, it drew a hard line. No access to military-grade magnets. That means U.S. defense contractors still face a chokehold in one of the most sensitive corners of the supply chain. So, yes, the White House called it a win. But behind the press conferences and photo ops, the fine print tells a different story. One of imbalance, restriction, and rising costs back home. The trade war didn't end. It just changed uniforms. Trump stood on the podium and called it a win. He promised that rare earths would start flowing again, that Chinese students could keep studying in U.S. universities, and that trade had finally resumed after months of tension. To the casual observer, it sounded like a breakthrough, a long-awaited thaw in a frozen relationship. But peel back the headlines, and you'll see something different. Smoke, mirrors, and a deal loaded with half measures. Yes, China agreed to restart rare earth exports, but only for civilian use. That means manufacturers making electric vehicles, wind turbines, and consumer tech can breathe a little easier. But defense contractors? They're still facing supply shortages. China's grip on military-grade materials hasn't loosened at all. And that's no small detail. Rare earths are essential in everything from fighter jets to missile guidance systems. Without full access, America's defense supply chain remains exposed. Meanwhile, the bigger shift is happening quietly, under the radar. While Washington celebrates a symbolic win, Beijing still dominates the rare earth game. Over 85% of global rare earth refining happens inside Chinese borders. That hasn't changed, and it's not likely to anytime soon. So even if the raw minerals come from other countries, they often end up in Chinese refineries before reaching the U.S. The bottleneck is still there, and it's still controlled by China. But here's the kicker. While China played the long game, the U.S. played hardball with itself. As part of the deal, the U.S. locked in a 55% tariff on Chinese imports. That's 5 times higher than what China imposed in return. On paper, it sounds like a strong move. Punish Beijing, protect American jobs. But in reality, it means U.S. companies are now forced to pay drastically more for Chinese goods, from raw materials to finished electronics. And those extra costs? They don't vanish. They trickle down to the checkout line. American importers are absorbing the hit and passing it on. Families shopping for phones, batteries, appliances, or car parts will feel it first. Prices won't just rise, they'll stay high. The tariff acts like a permanent surcharge on daily life. So while Washington pats itself on the back, the true score is becoming clear. China keeps its leverage in rare earths, avoids major inflation at home, and watches as the U.S. consumer quietly foots the bill. This wasn't a strategic breakthrough. It was a reshuffling of pressure, away from Beijing and straight onto American wallets. You don't need to follow global politics to feel the impact of this deal. It's already hitting where it hurts most, your wallet. In June 2025, the U.S. Consumer Price Index showed the writing on the wall. Core inflation is stuck at 2.8%, while headline inflation creeps up to 2.4%. Those numbers might sound small on paper, but in real life, they mean the cost of everyday essentials, groceries, gas, gadgets, isn't going back down. And now, add a 55% tariff on Chinese goods to the mix. That's not a policy shift. It's a price hike on nearly every aisle, from smartphones to air conditioners, car parts to kitchen appliances. The cost of anything that relies on Chinese manufacturing is heading north. U.S. businesses are scrambling to reroute their supply chains, but those pivots come with delays, markups, and mountains of uncertainty. And here's the harsh truth: companies won't absorb those costs. Consumers will. Retailers are already signaling price increases. Electronics are expected to rise by 7 to 12% before the holiday season. Auto shops are warning of higher repair bill. Even home renovation projects are getting more expensive as imported fixtures and materials fall under the tariff wall. This isn't inflation driven by market forces, it's being baked in by policy. Supporters of the deal call it leverage. But for working families, it's just another line item on a growing list of things they can no longer afford. The shelves may still be stocked, but fewer people can fill their carts. So while Washington points to trade balance charts and political wins, Americans at the checkout line are left asking one simple question: if this is victory, why does everything cost more? The flow of goods between the world's two largest economies isn't just slowing, it's drying up. In May 2025, U.S. imports from China totaled around $29 billion. But now, that number is in free fall, with trade experts warning it could plunge to near zero as the 55% tariff continues to choke supply chains. Entire product lines, electronics, textiles, auto parts, are becoming too expensive to import, forcing retailers to either drop them or raise prices dramatically. And it's not just what's coming in, it's what's not going out. U.S. exports to China, long dominated by agriculture, energy, and manufacturing, have been crippled by red tape and cooling demand. With just a 10% tariff on American goods, China's still technically open for business, but the reality is more complex. Trade licenses are stalling, customs inspections are tighter, and Chinese companies wary of political fallout are quietly turning to other suppliers. The result? A one-way slowdown that disproportionately punishes U.S. exporters, especially in manufacturing hubs and farm states that once depended on Chinese demand. The only exception? Services. Financial consulting, cloud computing, logistics, and academic partnerships are still trickling through, thanks to fewer physical constraints and softer regulatory hurdles. But even there, cracks are forming. Canadian and European banks are stepping in. Chinese universities are expanding domestic programs. Tech firms are building their own alternatives. Goods trade is collapsing. Services are on thin ice. And the once mighty U.S.-China economic corridor is starting to look like a ghost highway. If this is decoupling, it's no longer theoretical. It's visible in trade volumes, in port traffic, and in the growing silence between two economies that once couldn't stop talking. While Washington celebrates its trade breakthrough, the rest of the world is quietly reaching for the exit. Credit agencies aren't buying the hype. Both Moody's and S&P have issued downgrades on U.S. sovereign debt, a signal that global confidence in America's financial stability is eroding fast. And in Hong Kong, major funds are now preparing to dump U.S. treasuries, a move not seen since the 2008 financial crisis. Why the sudden fear? Because the math isn't adding up. In May 2025 alone, the U.S. posted a jaw-dropping $316 billion budget deficit, one of the highest monthly gaps in history. That pushed the total for the fiscal year to over $1.36 trillion, and counting. Analysts now expect the full-year deficit to surpass 7% of GDP, putting enormous pressure on bond markets and threatening long-term borrowing costs. The deeper problem? Interest payments on that debt are skyrocketing, with 10-year Treasury yields climbing past 5% and 30-year bonds approaching 5%. The cost of financing America's debt is rising faster than its economy can keep up. Foreign creditors are watching, and some are blinking. If Hong Kong, Japan, or Europe start offloading U.S. bonds in volume, it won't just be a ratings issue. It'll be a liquidity crisis, one that could send shockwaves through global markets and leave the U.S. scrambling for new buyers or printing its way out. The trade deal may have grabbed headlines, but behind the scenes, America's fiscal foundation is cracking, and the world is no longer sure it wants to be holding the bag when it breaks. In a move that barely made headlines, but could shake global finance, Ontario raised $2 billion in June 2025 without touching Wall Street. No JP Morgan, no Goldman Sachs. Instead, the province turned to Barclays and Canadian banks to underwrite its bond issuance. It may seem like a local decision, but it's not. For the first time in over a decade, a major North American government completely bypassed U.S. financial firms, the same firms that once dominated global capital markets. And it's not about fees, it's about trust, risk, and political insulation. With U.S. credit ratings slipping and fiscal instability rising, international players are starting to look for ways to hedge their exposure. Ontario's quiet decision to go local is a canary in the coal mine, a signal that even allies are preparing for a world where Wall Street might not be the default anymore. It's not a divorce, yet. But it's definitely a trial separation, and others are watching closely. Yes, the U.S. got something. Rare earth shipments, student visa access. But at what cost? Look closer, and the scoreboard starts to shift. The U.S. imposed 5 times the tariff pressure that China did. Inflation at home is climbing. The deficit is spiraling past $1.36 trillion, and foreign buyers are backing away from U.S. debt just as interest costs soar. China, meanwhile, it retains control over 85% of the world's refined rare earths. It gave no ground on critical export controls for defense or dual-use materials. It continues to trade with Europe and BRICS without the tariff baggage. In short, China traded access for optics and walked away holding the upper hand. So yes, the deal exists on paper. But it's starting to look more like a Pyrrhic victory, a win so costly, it might not be a win at all. Now comes the real question. Is this a deal or a strategic misstep wrapped in short-term spin? Because what the U.S. traded away, global confidence, market trust, fiscal control, might take years to rebuild. Meanwhile, China's rare earth flows can be paused with a license tweak. Canadian bonds can keep skipping Wall Street. And inflation? That doesn't go away just because a press conference says deal. If allies like Canada are already moving quietly, how long before others follow?